So moving on finally to violence against women and girls, which is another topic that comes up an awful lot, both within my office and I know, Chief Constable, for you as well. I know it's something that you get asked about an awful lot. And of course, there has been some really great and positive work done by Surrey Police on this, and something that our inspectorate body, HMIC FRS, has noticed as well, which is incredibly positive. I know that there is a strategy that's going to be submitted to chief officers in February, and I just wonder what the plans are around that, and to make sure that as an office, the APCC and I am also cited on all of that work.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. I'll maybe just open up with a few sort of headline points, set it in the context of some of the statistics that's happening, and then hand over to the Deputy Chief Constable to talk about the plan that he's been leading with colleagues. So on the safety point, I mean, those that have tuned into these meetings before that'll know I, as part of my sort of commitments to the county, have got a twofold promise, really. We want a county that is safe, objectively safe in a way that you can measure it, and also one that feels safe as well. So just a few stats on that. On the feelings of safety, in our latest independent survey, looking particularly at female respondents here, 75% of them said that they feel very or fairly safe walking alone after dark. Now, you might say that's quite a high level, but actually it's dropped a bit from the 80s for Surrey. So now the impact of some of the horrific national headlines and the extent of the debate that's been going on might have affected that. So we really want to get that back up to higher levels. Reporting concerns online through Street Safe Surrey. If you just search that online, then you can report locations to us across the county where you think might want better lighting, or shrubbery cutting back, or policing presence to be there at certain times of the day, and so on. So please do use that Street Safe tool to report to us, and we will work with local partners to try and get that figure back up again. So that's the sort of public sort of space point, and I know that the deputy will come on to that as part of the strategy. Another part of the strategy is dealing with serial perpetrators, to really have a perpetrator focus against violence against women and girls, and because predominantly this is male perpetrated violence against women. In Surrey, we measure the number of repeat perpetrators. That was running at over 1,000 for Surrey. They're just the ones that we know about. With the work of our high harm perpetrator unit, so that's a unit that concentrates on the most dangerous offenders, we've driven that down to 940. So still a long way to go, but it shows our determination to tackle these repeat perpetrators. In terms of supporting victims, we do survey victims and survivors of domestic abuse, and they give us their views. The current figures show low 80% satisfactions. We have been in the 90s before, which we're really proud of. We want to keep that at really high levels. There were actually, in that dip into the low 80s, for some reason there were fewer respondents to the survey. We're not entirely sure what that was. In the latest figures, which are not published in the paper that's with this meeting today, I can say that it has risen back up again in the latest quarter to 89% satisfaction again, which we're pleased with. On serious sexual offending, we have seen increases, particularly as lockdown restrictions were lifted, but we remain the second safest county nationally for serious sexual offences. And I'll just finish with one notable success from Friday before I hand over to the deputy. And one of our outreach partners were in touch with me on Friday evening to share the news of a significant prosecution that went through the courts on Friday. So this was an offender with three different victims charged with 21 offences. We got 18 guilty verdicts off that. The cumulative total was 102 years of imprisonment. Of course, they won't, in this system, they won't serve 102 years. But a 15-year concurrent sentence, deemed a dangerous offender, so an extended licence after the original one finishes, so that'll be for a 15-year licence. sexual offenders register for life, sexual harm prevention order for life, and restraining order ×3 for life. So that's the sort of result that we can get against some of these highly dangerous offenders when we work collectively with our partner agencies, and that's exactly what the strategy and the plan is intended to do. And happy to take questions, Commissioner. I'll hand over to the Deputy to talk through some of the details of the plan.
That's great, and I know an enormous amount of work will have gone into securing that conviction, Chief Constable, from your colleagues, from, of course, our partner services right across the county, and of course, very importantly, from the victim and the witnesses as well, who, of course, will have put an enormous amount of time and effort and emotion into securing that conviction as well. So congratulations to everybody involved, and I hope that we can hear a lot more of those cases. I think that's exactly what we need to see. Before we move over to the Deputy Chief Constable, I just want to ask you about something else that I know is on the rise, which is stalking. And I wonder if you could just spend a few minutes talking about the rise in stalking, what Surrey Police are doing about it, what happens if you are a woman or a man who reports stalking, how the police handle it, and just give a bit of reassurance to the public around how we're handling that.
Absolutely, yes. And stalking or coercive controlling behaviour as well. We've put an awful lot of training and investment into in recent years. We are seeing the numbers increase, not hugely so in the last period. So we're on coercive controlling behaviour, we were up by just 28 offences. Each one of these additional reports, though, we count as a success because it means that it's been identified. And we expect that this is a much underreported area. There's a new screening tool, a stalking screening tool that we're using now to make sure that we're identifying them amongst other reporting, because sometimes the reporting person doesn't realise in the description that they might be given to us when they call that 101 number or contact us online that they're actually being stalked, and it's through conversation and the stalking screening tool that we will identify it. I mean, the things to look out for is if it's unwanted, if it's fixated, if it's repeated, then some clear signs of stalking behaviour, and particularly if it's escalating, then we would really want to know about it, because that sends a sort of high risk signal to us. On that screening tool, we are working with a number of forces on a university evaluation of that, as I believe it's Middlesex University that working with some forces on that, and we've introduced some advocacy workers as well that can work alongside those members of our community that are experiencing this awful crime to make sure that their interests are looked after as well.
Thank you. No, I know that people will be reassured by that, because it is something that an awful lot of women and men have faced, and it's not always the easiest thing to report. Would be absolutely delighted to hear from the Deputy Chief Constable about the work that he and others are doing around the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, we were one of the first forces nationally to have a strategy of violence against women and girls, and it predates the terrible events in relation to Sarah Everard and her murder, because we do recognise that it is an important area, and it's one that's underreported, and that there's also a trust and confidence issue with some women reporting that to us. So we've worked hard in all of those areas. Just take the opportunity to try and provide some reassurance and do a bit of myth busting if I can as well. So one of the things often at the centre of a crime of violence against a woman will be the woman's phone. If it's domestic or stalking, as you've just mentioned sometimes, and quite often with a sexual offence. And we recognise in Surrey that it's that woman will have been through something really traumatic already, and the last thing they want is to be without their phone, where most of us nowadays, our lives are on there for any extended period of time. So what we try and do is agree a time when we can examine part or what we need to of that woman's phone with them, and we try and make sure that we hang on to it for no more than 24 hours. So I know that is something in the past that has put people off, and I just want to reassure people that we do that as sensitively and as quickly as possible. We've invested quite heavily in this area. We during the last year have set up teams specifically dealing with domestic abuse, and that's to make sure that we've got officers who become really very specialist at dealing with that, are really well linked into some of our partners, and the Chief Constable mentioned one of them, one of our partner agencies, East Surrey Domestic Abuse Service over on East Surrey, who we do a lot of training and work with, but it also means that they understand that victims of domestic abuse present in different ways. They don't always understand that they're a victim, even particularly where it's coercive and controlling behaviour, those teams have gone down extremely well, and we have officers that are seeking to not only join those teams but stay on them, because they really do enjoy that specialist work. Overlaying that, we've had other developments, such as we've got specialists now in that are not police officers, but work and will report to us and support victims in Surrey's hospitals now, because sometimes victims will end up in hospital and they won't have reported it to us. They won't report to us without the victim's consent, but they will give them that support and encouragement to do so. And then in relation to our most serious sexual offences, we've seen, as you've highlighted, an increase over the last year of about 20% of reporting. And as the Chief Constable said, we're still the second lowest in the country, or second safest, but we have seen quite a significant increase. And in order to match that demand, we've increased our number of specialist investigators by 4 working in that team. And I spent some time with that team recently. Absolutely fabulous, committed officers, and I just want to say the care and compassion that they have is absolutely moving. The determination to try and bring offenders to justice is superb. And so if anybody is listening and they're in two minds as to whether to report something, all I can say is that as a victim, we are there to support you, and we will do our absolute best to bring the offender to justice, but that's with you. That's not making life difficult for you. We recognise you've been through something traumatic already. And then just, if I can just finish really, what's important is understanding 2 things. Where things are happening that go unreported, and we've done a survey, we've had over 5,000 women that have contributed to that, around which parts of Surrey they feel safe in, which they don't. We're overlaying that information with our own data so that we can work with partners to make sure that we can target the right areas. But we also need to get our internal culture right when it comes to domestic abuse and violence against women in particular. And we have been one of the leading forces in terms of making sure that those women, that in particular women who are victims of domestic abuse, where the offender may be part of a policing organisation, so whether that's Surrey or one of our neighbouring forces, then that we absolutely deal with that appropriately and fairly and transparently and give them the confidence. And that means, for example, that where the suspect is somebody from Surrey Police, they will not be investigated by anybody who has any relationship, even on social media, with anyone involved. And there are a number of measures like that we've put in place to make sure that the investigations are absolutely clear, and also they're restricted so that we don't cause any additional embarrassment to any victim involved if they're part of our organisation. So what we recognise is the way that we treat crimes with our own officers and staff is a barometer, I believe, for the way that we deliver our service to the public. And so it's absolutely vital to me that we get that right, because our officers and staff will look at each other and see how we're dealing with crimes internally. And so I absolutely want us to set the highest standard there, because I think then it's right to expect officers and staff to be able to give a really good service to the public. Her Majesty Inspector of Constabulary, College of Policing have commended us for the work that we've done on that, and indeed they visited us to look at best practice that can be taken to other forces. Every single one of those crimes gets reviewed on a monthly basis independently, and also on the group that I've had working on that, we've had an independent chief executive from a domestic abuse charity and sexual abuse charity to advise us and absolutely apply that independent scrutiny. So this is something we really do take seriously, and I'm really proud of some of the work that we've done there.
Thank you, and it's particularly great to hear, I think, about the work that's being done internally, because I think you're absolutely right, Deputy Chief Constable, that how we police our own is absolutely vital and is such an important part of giving the public confidence, particularly in light of recent reports in the media about some police forces, although thankfully not Surrey. I'm always amazed and really disheartened when I hear people say to me that domestic abuse, domestic violence doesn't happen in Surrey. And I wonder if you could just for a couple of minutes explain the impact that statements like that have, first of all, on victims coming forward, and why it's so important that we sort of don't think that domestic violence or domestic abuse happens to any certain category or any particular category of people, but actually can happen to anybody and everybody.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I can confirm that it does happen in Surrey, and it happens no matter what class of society you are, how wealthy, poor you are, or wherever in Surrey you might live, whatever your vocation is, whether you work or you don't, you can be a victim of domestic abuse in Surrey, and we see that every single day. So, and it's important that we don't make those. It's a crime that doesn't really discriminate, and it's one that utterly ruins the lives of those victims. It is all-consuming. It affects them sometimes not just physically, but it also affects their confidence and just their quality of life hugely. And I've seen that in Surrey happen where the victim and offender have absolutely no money, worries, and very wealthy, right down to those that have the stresses and strains of having very little income. It doesn't matter. It can affect anyone. And that statement to say it doesn't happen in Surrey is only damaging.
Thank you. Thank you very much to everybody. And I think that's a really sobering point on which to conclude this meeting. I'd like to thank everybody who has watched. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody.